CBS 4 and CPT 12 present the 2014 gubernatorial debate.
Thanks for joining us for this gubernatorial debate. I'm CBS 4 political specialist Sean Boyd.
And I'm CPT 12 political analyst Eric Sonderman. Gentlemen, thank you both for being here for your final debate of this election season.
Democratic incumbent John Hickenlooper is running for his second term as governor. He ran for governor after serving 2 terms as Denver's mayor. The governor moved to Colorado in 1981 as a geologist, but lost his job in the economic downturn. In 1988, he opened his first brew pub, the Wynn Coop in Lodo. He's 62 years old and has 1 son.
And his Republican challenger, Bob Beaupre, is a Colorado native. He served as the first congressman for the 7th Congressional District for 2 terms before running for governor in 2006. He has managed both a bank and his family's real estate, including a buffalo breeding ranch. Bob is 66 years old and has been married to Claudia for 44 years. They have 4 children and 4 grandchildren.
We want to begin tonight on the topic of public safety, the subject of an explosive ad released just yesterday. That ad suggested that Governor Hickenlooper is partly to blame for the murder of State Prisons Chief Tom Clements. We want to show the entire original ad.
With John Hickenlooper as governor, is your family safe?
That ad prompted Tom Clements' widow, Lisa Clements, to send a public statement to Bob Beaupre, saying in part, "On several occasions this year, you have attempted to use our family's tragic loss for your personal and political gain, and we are respectfully asking you to stop." And Congressman, in fact, you did change that exact line in the ad last night. Why go there in the first place? And isn't it over the top to ask, as the ad did, are Coloradans safe with John Hickenlooper as governor?
Sean, thanks to you and Channel 4 for providing this forum, and thanks for the question, frankly. Yes, I think public safety is a critical issue, and I think public safety ought to be part of any gubernatorial debate, and that's exactly the question we were raising. Look, my heart breaks like I think every Coloradan's heart broke for the family of Tom Clements, and certainly for his widow, Lisa. My intention was never to offend her or to politicize that event. My attempt and my intention still is to raise a serious question about John Hickenlooper's failed record on public safety. That was but one crystallizing event in a whole series we found out through the Denver Post, through other media news outlets of, I'm afraid, serious, tragic failures in leadership on his watch in public safety. I think that needs to be a governor's first responsibility, is to protect and defend the safety of the citizens. And on my watch, that will absolutely be a priority. I never intended to offend Lisa, and that's why we've changed out the traffic on the ad, and there's plenty of other subjects to bring up, and that's what we've done.
Thank you, Congressman. Governor Hickenlooper, your response?
Well, I think that, you know, there's obviously Tom Clements was an exemplary public servant and a close friend, and I do think that invoking his death for political purposes, I'm still dumbfounded, and I know it was difficult not just for Lisa and her 2 daughters, but for everyone. You know, I'm very disappointed that we shook hands and we had an agreement that, at least in the campaigns, within our own ads, we would only do positive ads. And I'm not sure how we see that as a positive ad. You know, obviously, well, I look back and all Tom Clements did, and he came out here specifically to address the issues around people in solitary confinement and getting released directly into the general population. There were 1,500 people in solitary confinement when he first came. He worked relentlessly and cut that number. We're down to a couple hundred people now, and no one being released directly to the public. So the problem that was being raised has been solved. I think the whole thing is unfortunate and really dumbfounding.
So, Governor, let's put the ad aside and talk about your record on public safety. I've watched as the democratically controlled legislature has failed to pass bills increasing penalties for DUI and vehicular homicide, while passing laws that reduce penalties for drug offenses and allow more violent criminals to be released into community corrections. And finally, your administration implemented a policy under which death row inmates get 4 hours a day of unsupervised leisure time. Your opponent suggests you've done a good deal to help criminals, but little for victims. How do you respond to that?
Well, what we've really worked on and will continue to work on is to try and make the state safer. The issues around truth in sentencing, parole reform, there's a science in terms of how we look at keeping our prisons safe, at the same time making sure we rehabilitate prisoners so that when they're released, the goal is that they can have a job, that they've got some opportunity to create a life so that they just don't get in that revolving door of continuous recidivism. The truth in sentencing issue, which we've done, in other words, for violent criminals at least, we have made sure that at least 85% do their full terms. But oftentimes, that 4 hours out for someone on death row, or the things that seem overly lenient, are trying to goad people into better behavior within the prison. And again, we do almost all of those changes come through we have a state commission on punishment and juvenile justice that goes through these things and decides, well, this is a good idea, this is a bad idea, and generally we support not everyone, but most of what comes through that commission.
Congressman Beaupre, your response?
Sean, the reality is in Colorado, we've got one of the worst recidivism rates, that means going back to prison, of any state in the nation. We are among the bottom 3. The governor says that he solved the problem of solitary confinement, administrative segregation. All he did was turn those in ADSEG back into the general prison population, and guess what? Prisoner-on-prisoner violence is up. Our streets aren't safer. 93%, according to 9 News, 93% of sex offenders are paroled directly into our neighborhoods without receiving any therapeutic rehabilitation before they're turned back into our neighborhoods. That's not defending public safety and improving public safety. That's taking your eye off the ball and failing to lead.
Thank you, Congressman. Let's change the subject now. Governor, you appointed a task force to head off contentious anti-fracking ballot measures. This is a polarizing issue, and the task force is made up of people on the fringes of the issue, people who will have to reach a 2/3 majority vote to move a recommendation to the legislature. Isn't this task force set up to fail?
Oh, I don't think so. I mean, if you look at the failure we were looking at to have those initiatives on the ballot, we were poised to lose tens of thousands of jobs and billions of dollars of capital investment in the state. We picked 21 people, and some of them come from the oil and gas side. Some are very strong advocates for local control. But the goal was to make sure all voices got heard and that they could come together and begin to find the compromises to find that balance. With horizontal drilling, we now have exploration and production activities coming closer and closer to people where they live. And we want to make sure if there is activity close to where someone lives, to a dwelling place, that they have that we're doing everything we can to mitigate that connection, and providing elected officials such as mayor or city council members the opportunity to talk about setbacks and yet make sure that we respect the private property that somebody who owns those mineral rights has. Oftentimes we forget that the person who owns those mineral rights often owned the mineral rights long before the house was built. And government shouldn't just come and take away that mineral right. We look at it, and I think this commission is going to be able to get to that point where through electrical drilling and rubber grommets, it can be quiet. We shroud it so there's not light. And then once the well is drilled, we make sure there are gauges so that the water and air is clean, and that we can really guarantee that there are no harmful effects to that dwelling.
Thank you, Governor. Congressman Beaupre, you have criticized the governor's task force and his tendency toward collaboration, saying it's a euphemism for kicking the can down the road. Are you against working together? How do we get anything done, like an agreement on oil and gas regulation?
No, hardly am I against collaboration and trying to find the right solution, but this wasn't the right solution. This was I think the epitome of kicking the can down the road. And Sean, the real reason the governor did this was a political reason. It's a solution in search of a problem. What he wanted to do is get these draconian extreme measures off the ballot so he and Mark Udall didn't have to deal with them in their reelection campaigns, and he was caving in, capitulating to Jared Polis and his special interest group constituencies that are his favorite constituencies, I guess. I think what should have been done, especially in this 2014 year, was to defeat these measures soundly so that we can level the playing field, create some certainty in the marketplace. That's what's driving jobs out of here. Jared Polis has already said he'll be back. This didn't end anything.
Thank you. Governor, I'll give you some time for a rebuttal here,
Well, I
and
think
you
that
as well, Congressman.
if you look at this commission, as some of the most respected Republicans in the state are either on it, people like Russ George, his running mate, Joe Rapella, applied to be on it. Hank Brown has spoken out in favor of it. I think there's a real chance to find, even though you've got a significant disagreement between the local control folks and people that see oil and gas as a crucial industry, I think they can find a collaborative place in the middle and mitigate that conflict that happens.
Congressman Beaupre.
Notably, he didn't pick my running mate, Joe Rapella, or any other county commissioner from an energy-producing county. Who he picked as his co-chair was a lady from Durango who is a member of an environmental extremist group sworn not to just regulate energy industry in Colorado, but to ban drilling in Colorado. What we ought to be doing is celebrating the fact that never in human history have we been able to harvest natural resources safer, more efficiently, cleaner than we can right now. That's something, again, to celebrate, not to punish. Create jobs in Colorado and embrace opportunity and actually achieve that objective that we all have talked about all our lifetimes of energy independence for North America and the United States.
Thank you, Congressman.
My turn to get in on the fun here, gentlemen. If the governor of another state that was contemplating legalizing recreational marijuana contacted you, what advice would you give? Simple question, straightforward. Congressman, you go first.
I'd advise them to be very cautious, and governors actually have contacted me and asked that question. And I think we're in a very much a learning phase right now in Colorado. The people of Colorado supported Amendment 64 by a significant majority, and when I raise my hand and take the oath of office to enforce the laws of Colorado, that will be one of them. But I think we need to enforce it as the law was passed. And I think we also need to be very objective and very honest about what we learn about consequences of this new law relative to our children, to young people, and to employees who are seeking jobs around the state of Colorado, because the consequences are real. Governors in the rest of the country are very much looking at Colorado, and I think when I'm asked that question, again, I'll tell them, be cautious as I think we are being cautious.
Governor, how would you feel those phone calls?
Well, I get a lot of those calls, as you can imagine. Last year I was the chair of the Western Governors Association. This year I'm the chair of the National Governors Association, and that's about 2/3 of the sitting governors are Republicans, so that's a large vote. They ask again and again, well, are the tax revenues significant enough to make it worth all the challenges? And I tell everyone, just what the congressman said, we need to wait. I opposed the legislation in the beginning, but when it passed 55-45, I think we've got an obligation to do everything we can to create a regulatory system that can work. We are, I think, in the middle of one of the great social experiments of the 21st century, and we're going to do everything we can to find a framework that makes it work, but we have to make sure we keep it out of the hands of kids. We know that this high THC pot has the potential to diminish their long-term memory if their brains are still growing, if they're still teenagers.
Thank you.
Next question. Colorado's unemployment rate fell to 5.4% last month, but that doesn't tell the whole story. Median household income is down about $4,000 since the recession started, and there are many counties where the unemployment rate is as high as 7, 8, 9, even 10%. What can you do to help those who've all but lost hope of finding a job? Governor?
Well, I think that now the unemployment in most of those counties has come down significantly. If you go out even on the West Slope, it has dropped in the last couple of months dramatically. But still, we have a lot of places where the recovery hasn't been as rapid as it has been along the Front Range. If you go to Fort Collins and Denver, everything's been booming. If you go down to Pueblo and El Paso County, it's struggling. I think what we've got to do is find ways to provide incentives in those places that still have lagging unemployment to generate new jobs, and that's through either entrepreneurs or what we call sometimes we call them lone rangers, but the young millennials who don't really want to work for a company, they want to work project to project, and we're trying to find what are the right incentives so that they don't just come into Denver, and millennials have been making kind of Denver and northern Colorado their primary destination. We want to make sure that they have other destinations and give them a little bit of incentive so that they would go to Pueblo or Colorado Springs or Grand Junction.
Governor, thank you. Congressman?
Sean, you're absolutely right. At best, this recovery has been spotty. We actually had negative growth last year in Mesa County, Grand Junction. The Colorado Springs area, negative growth. Pueblo barely stayed stagnant last year. And part of the reason is because so many opportunities that would historically come to Colorado have gone to states surrounding us. I think that's wrong. I don't have anything against those states, but I certainly am a big fan of Colorado opportunity. When I ask people what's wrong, they say it's government. 85,000 pages of federal regulations every year, almost 15,000 pages coming out of his administration of regulations every year, 2,000 new regulations implemented on his watch. I'm going to do just the opposite. On day one, I'm going to suspend new regulations. If they're not public safety related, let's stop. We'll audit government and invite you to join us in that audit. If it isn't pro-job, pro-opportunity, pro your individual liberty and freedom, we're going to get rid of it.
Thank you, Congressman.
Let's talk, gentlemen, about bipartisanship. It's something voters desperately want, as you know, and candidates seem to promise it during the election season. Can you tell us one idea from the other party's platform that you support and an idea from your party's platform that you oppose? And please be specific. Congressman, you're up.
Yeah, I think that the Democrat Party has largely been right for a long time in talking about education opportunity for children. Unfortunately, on this governor's watch and the Democrat Party being in charge of Colorado's legislature for a good bit of the recent past, it hasn't materialized. And as Elaine Berman is a Democrat, member of the State Board of Education, used to be a member of the DPS board. She said recently, based on the test scores that we just got back on Governor Hickenlooper's watch that deteriorated, she said, obviously, we need to be honest. What we're doing isn't working, and we need to be willing to change. Third grade reading scores in Colorado are absolutely shameful. When 30% of our children can't read at grade level, we've got a problem. We need to address it, and on my watch, we will. You asked about my party's platform. Some in my party have been a little strident on the question of illegal immigration. I think it's time we all face facts. We're a better nation than this and a better state than this, and we need to find a solution to that long-standing problem.
Governor, example of where you agree with the Republican platform and you disagree with the Democratic platform.
Well, obviously, the congressman came in and was talking a lot about cutting regulations. We embraced that from the beginning and said that the state government had to be pro-business. The whole state had to be pro-business, and then we had to find ways to cut unnecessary regulations. We cut 1,500 regulations and modified another 5,500 to try and take the friction out of business. Again, you can be relentlessly pro-business, but at the same time have high standards. When we support maybe oil and gas, and I would hold that would be an example where many in my party feel that hydraulic fracturing or any kind of hydrocarbon extraction is dangerous and should be banned. You know, I think it's the state's obligation to make sure that we get to a place where we can guarantee that the air and water is going to be clean where people live, but that oil and gas, and especially that natural gas, is a transition fuel that's going to get us to a cleaner future. So I've gone against the party there, but at the same time, in terms of regulations and overall government approach to business, we have tried to stay positive and pro.
Thank you. We've also asked our viewers to send us the questions they wanted to ask to each of you.
Our Alan Cheney joins us with those questions.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks, Sean. Now, we're going to give each of you 30 seconds to answer these questions, so I'll ask you to move it along. We're going to start in Jefferson County. It is the county that has decided statewide races in the past and will very likely again this year. This fall, we saw a school district in turmoil as teachers called in sick, students walked out of class. Teachers were upset about a merit pay proposal, as well as a plan to possibly change the College Board design curriculum for AP U.S. history. Students focused on the curriculum issue. Now, that prompted questions from several viewers. Gentlemen, Randy Arnold asks, what is your opinion of the action of the school board in Jefferson County relative to the teaching of American history? Governor, we'll start with you.
Well, obviously, if you're talking about AP tests, there's going to be a standard test that's going to be given that students all over the country are completing. So we better make sure we're teaching all of American history. If we're going to be talking about one thing, we're talking about another. And I think that that a small number of people trying to change the way that the individual parts of history that are taught really doesn't make sense. And if you're going to change it significantly, then you're putting your kids who are actually trying to get a grade on an AP test that will allow them to qualify for college credit, you're putting them at a tremendous disadvantage.
Congressman?
Well, I think it's perfectly appropriate for an elected school board, just like other elected bodies, to debate issues, in this case, such as curriculum. But I think it needs to be very open, very transparent, and I think certainly parents and teachers need to be involved. What offended me about that process is that the kids were hurt. The students were hurt. We lost class time and instruction time, and I think there ought to be a way to resolve these kind of issues and disputes, in this case, in a more grown-up professional manner than to take kids out of classroom as well as teachers out of a classroom. This was really much more of a labor dispute than I think a curriculum dispute, and now I think the tragedy was, unfortunately, the children.
Now, given the events of the day today, we have had another school shooting in America, this time in Washington State. The conversation's likely to turn to guns again. Scott Lee wanted to talk about gun control, pointing to the new laws, and his bottom line here is, what is your stand on gun control moving forward? Congressman, we start with you.
It's a very good question and an appropriate question given my opponent in this race. Our sheriffs tried to tell him that the gun bills that he signed in 2013 would neither improve public safety nor could they be enforced. The governor didn't even listen to our sheriffs, the chief law enforcement officers in every county, and then lied to our sheriffs, that's their word, lied to our sheriffs that he didn't even know that they wanted to talk to him. Said he didn't talk to Michael Bloomberg. His own record said that he did. And he told the sheriffs that he didn't do that either. Look, I don't think the problem is that we need more laws. I think the problem is that we need more mental health intervention, and frankly, that's an issue that has gone wanting on his watch as well. I think we need to be very proactive about solving problems before they happen, and oftentimes it's mental health that's behind it.
Governor Hickenlooper?
Well, Congressman, you might have missed it, but we did add $30 million to the mental health budget 2 years ago, which is the largest increase in the history of the state. Might have missed your attention. I don't see new gun regulations coming down the road, but I think that the universal background checks, where we were trying to make sure that guns didn't get into the hands of dangerous people, made a lot of sense. And if we got to about half the gun purchases in 2012. We wanted to get universal. And if you looked at those gun purchases, in the gun safety checks, we did 38 people who had been guilty of homicide tried to buy a gun, and we stopped them. 133 people found guilty of sexual assault tried to buy a gun, and we stopped them in 2012. There were 420 people who had a judicial restraining order not to see an ex-boss or a spouse. They tried to buy a gun, and we stopped them. And people said, well, crooks aren't stupid. They're not going to go get a background check when they're buying a gun. Just for the record, 236 people, when they came to pick up their gun, we arrested them for an outstanding warrant. And I think that, again, that legislation was not intended to take guns away from people, just to keep them out of the hands of dangerous individuals.
All right, let's go to this. This is a scene we have seen all too many times, all of us in Colorado. I-70's backups. Backups as people head home from the mountains, stuck in traffic for hours at a time, or even head to the mountains. Congressman, let's start with you. Paula from Highlands Ranch asks, what do you feel is the best way to address the I-70 congestion?
Great question, and Paula, thank you very much, because there's been very few questions about transportation in this entire campaign. Look, what I want to do, and I put forward this idea some weeks ago, let's renew the trans bonds. They're about to be paid off. And if we did that, I've talked to public finance experts on this, if we did it exactly at the same ratio that we've been doing that since 1999, that not only fixed I-25, the T-Rex project, but a couple dozen high priority projects around the state. We could generate at least $3.5 billion. Now, instead of Band-Aids and patchwork on I-70, let's get serious about improving the capacity and the transportation opportunities on I-70 and do some serious public finance. Our state doesn't even have a CFO. We've got some good budget people, don't get me wrong. We've got some good budget people that can add up the numbers, but we don't have a chief financial officer to tell us how to best utilize the resources we've got available. On my watch, we'll change that, and we'll address our transportation challenges too.
Governor Hickenlooper?
Well, we do have a CFO in terms of the treasurer, just as an aside. The solution of bonds...
But not in your office.
That's true. We have a state publicly elected treasurer.
Not working for the governor.
Come, let me answer. This idea of bonds, that's what referendum D was, which the congressman opposed. If we did renew those trans bonds, there's only $135 million left, so there are not going to be any big projects. We focused in the short term on making sure that by expanding the twin tunnels, and the second twin tunnel will be expanded by December of this year, then if we go forward, we'll be able to harden the shoulders, and then during rush hour, we'll be able to let those shoulders become a third lane. So Friday afternoons and Saturday mornings going westbound, and then Sunday afternoons, Monday mornings coming back eastbound, we'll have that extra lane. But that's a short-term solution. Long-term, we're going to have to look at managed lanes, a new lane with a shoulder of its own that will eventually be used for buses, mass transit. People will be able to pay a toll if they want to use it during, and that toll will probably be flexing. The key to the future, though, is recognizing that the new vehicles, new cars and trucks are coming out, they're using less fuel. That means we're going to have less revenue coming to pay for this. So as a state, we've really got to come together and decide where are the new revenues going to come from.
All right,
Alan, I've got to have a rebuttal on that.
All right, we'll give you one. Go ahead.
He obviously doesn't even understand what the trans bonds were about, because what we're talking about is utilizing a percentage, 50 in this case, of the federal gas tax that comes back to Colorado anyway, and using that to calculate how much we can finance. That's how the trans bonds worked, and worked marvelously well for the last 15 years. And let me say again, public finance experts tell us that we can access $3.5 billion with a B dollars. That's not minor money. That's serious money, and we ought to be doing exactly that.
And if I can, Alan, just to put in on that. So
we have to let you in. Go ahead.
So there's $135 million left on that. You'd have to get a vote of the people, which is fine to go for, to get that $3.5 billion. And then you'd be taking a diminishing revenue source because of the less amount of gasoline we're going to be selling to try and pay for this new amount of construction. So you're really kind of going out on a very risky endeavor, which if you did have a good CFO, I can guarantee you they wouldn't recommend it.
Oh, yes, they would.
All right, gentlemen, we're going to move on. Thank you very much for addressing the concerns from our viewers. Let's go back to Sean.
My favorite segment, one that is unique to CBS 4. More than $6 million has been spent on advertising in this race, much of it from the Democratic and Republican Governors Associations. I gave several ads a reality check and found claims that didn't always hold up under scrutiny. In this part of our debate, we'll listen to a clip from an ad and give you each 45 seconds to respond. We begin with an ad by Governor Hickenlooper in which you tout your mediator skills.
If you want to know what it's like in the hot seat as governor, work in a restaurant kitchen. There's always somebody ticked off about something. I'll get your number. But if you really listen, you can meet in the middle. It's an approach.
You've taken heat for trying to straddle the middle on several issues, including the death penalty, giving a mass murderer an indefinite reprieve, then saying if your opponent makes it an issue and you lose, you might give him clemency. Your critics say this shows a lack of decisiveness and leadership. How do you respond?
Well, certainly in terms of the death penalty, I wasn't trying to straddle the middle. I looked at a situation that, I've been very clear and I've been very consistent. I don't think government should be taking a life. And we all have our own relationship with God, but in the end, I recognize that a lot of people disagree with that. I didn't want to pull the rug out from under the entire legal system. I wanted to have the conversation. I appreciate you asking the question. and it is certainly a difficult one. I look at each one of these situations, and in the end, when you come back to capital punishment, my feeling was, I don't think, and I really believe this, government should be taking a life, but the next governor might.
Thank you. Congressman, you, like the governor, pledged not to run negative ads, and yet you ran some of those negative ads. Let's take a look at one of them.
John Hickenlooper says he opposes negative ads, but that's Hickenlooper hypocrisy. Here's what...
So the negative ads you referred to in this ad were by the Democratic Governors Association, not the Hickenlooper campaign. It's true, he could have denounced them, but the Republican Governors Association is running attack ads against Hickenlooper, and you're not denouncing them. Congressman, aren't you being hypocritical here?
No, I don't think so at all, Sean, because as you pointed out in your fact check of that very ad that the Democrat Governors Association ran, and I think is still running, it was false, it was misleading, it was untrue, it was a direct attack ad. And the basis of that question that you put up, that gimmick that he pulled in the Channel 9 debate, was a question from Joey Bunch, asking him if he wasn't being a bit hypocritical, being a member of the Democrat Governors Association, former vice chairman of the Democrat Governors Association, and having raised money for the Democrat Governors Association, to not call what was blatantly obvious, and he knows, to be a false attack against me. So if it's true, if it's based on a vote that somebody's taken, a bill somebody signed, a statement they've made, I don't think that's a negative attack ad. I think that's a contrast that needs to be drawn out in the course of a political debate.
Although, as I pointed out also in my fact check, the Hickenlooper campaign cannot coordinate with the Republican.
But Sean, he hasn't lost his First Amendment rights to speak out. And that's what's really behind this, is at least stand up and say, that's false, throw the flag, call a foul. And he could at least do that. But he hasn't. To this date, he hasn't. Maybe tonight.
No, I've happily said to take them all down. I've said that again and again. Take down all the negative ads. That's what we agreed to. You said I won't run, I will only run positive ads. Your ads haven't been anywhere close to positive.
You broke the promise before we stopped answering Joey Bunch's question.
The campaign has never, our campaign has never run anything but a positive ad. Now, that's everything we can control, and I denounce all the negative ads. I'm happy to do it.
But you're also happy to let other people do your dirty work for you.
I denounce
You're very good at that,
take
Governor.
Them all down.
You're very, oh, please, Democrat Governors Association, take them down.
I hear you saying take the Republican governor.
The silence is deafening.
They spent $2 million attacking me, and you were mute. Where was your voice back then?
Because they were based on facts that were documented, Governor. That's the difference.
Whatever.
All right, gentlemen, moving along. Governor, the Republican Governors Association invested heavily in this race. Its ads frame you as someone who lacks leadership. Let's take a look at one of the ads.
John Hickenlooper is a fun guy to shoot pool with. But when it comes to making the tough decisions, Hickenlooper won't step up to the table. He dropped the ball on mass murderer Nathan Dunlap and flip-flopped on gun rights.
Okay, so we addressed Dunlap. Let's take up gun control. First, you told a group of sheriffs you didn't have all the facts when you signed the bills. Should you have signed them then? Second, in regards to the high-capacity magazine ban, you said to the sheriffs, and I quote, as you point out, how important really was it? How much difference will it make? How is this not a flip-flop?
Well, what I was pointing out, well, first, and just finishing Nathan Dunlap, because I didn't say this the first time, I mean, he's going to die in prison one way or the other as we go through the whole controversy. In terms of the high-capacity magazines, there are so many out there that it's going to take a long time to have an effect. But the point of the law is that long-term, you're going to move towards a safer future. Now, I certainly said, that it's not going to have a large immediate effect, and you were always trying to measure how can I get things to change more rapidly. But I still stand behind that law that was what made sense. And we had, again, a great many facts. As we got more facts in, it wouldn't have changed things. I do think that we should have spent more time and had more of an open discussion over the entire gun law issue.
Why did you say how important really was it to the sheriffs?
Well, I was trying to recognize the fact that it will take years for that legislation to have a significant material effect. But it begins the course. I mean, high-capacity magazines, right? Magazines of more than 15 rounds are not necessary for defending your home. In most cases, they're illegal for hunting. And if you look at the mass shootings since the mid-'80s, 31 out of 42 have had magazines more than 15 rounds, and 30 to 40% of the police officers killed in the line of duty over the last 10 years all use magazines that had more than 15 rounds.
Thank you, Governor. Congressman, this ad is by a group that gets its funding from the Democratic Governors Association and addresses your position on abortion.
This is the race that matters, the one Colorado women can't afford to lose. We can't give Bob Beaupre the power to be governor. Beaupre threatened to ban abortion, even in cases of rape and incest, and if elected governor, said he would oppose funding Planned Parenthood.
Congressman, you did say in 2006 that you would sign a bill banning abortion except in cases where the mother's life was at risk. But you told me it's impossible to say what you would do until you saw the bill. You also said in 2006 you would oppose tax dollars for Planned Parenthood, but now you say you wouldn't oppose all tax dollars, just those for abortion. You are adamantly opposed to abortion, and yet we're to believe you wouldn't sign a bill banning abortion even if you become governor, and wouldn't strip Planned Parenthood of funding given the opportunity?
Sean, the fact is right now, if I understand the state budget correctly, and I think I do, Planned Parenthood isn't getting funding from the state because they haven't applied for it. So that's kind of taken care of already under the governor's watch. I want to be very clear on this. I am not here, not a candidate for governor, to infringe on anybody's rights. I know what the law is, and I'm not going to have the opportunity to change that law. I'm here to bolster the economy, to protect and defend people's freedom, including women's right to birth control, women's right to choose the kind of birth control that they want to use. I just don't think taxpayers ought to be paying for it. That's the big differentiation, and that's where I stand. I'll defend your rights. I happen to have my own principles and my own beliefs, but I'll certainly defend your freedom to choose as you see fit.
Thank you, Congressman. Governor, you ran a couple of ads touting your experience as a restaurant owner, the suggestion being that you are pro-business. Here's a clip from one of those ads.
We got rid of 1,200 unnecessary regulations and focused on job creation. Now we're first in the nation for economic growth.
So the same website that ranked us first in economic growth also ranked us middle of the pack for our economy overall. While the state has repealed more than 1,200 rules and regulations, it's added more than 2,000 new rules since you took office. Governor, aren't you cherry-picking numbers here?
No, I don't think we're cherry-picking numbers. Some of the rules and regulations that we added, we did in concert with industry. You look at the methane regulations. Colorado became the first state in America to regulate methane. Our natural gas producing wells, an inspector from the company is going to have to go out with an infrared gun and make sure there are no leaks at every well every month. Every high-producing well will get an inspection every month. That regulation was formed by the industry working in partnership with the environmental community and the government working as a mediator. Now, of course, we created more regulations to make that happen, to make sure that everybody plays by the same level. But that doesn't mean that all regulations are bad. Congressman Beaupre talks about how we are at the moment of having the cleanest air and the cleanest water as we produce hydrocarbons now than we've ever had. And that's true, but it's because of regulations. The key is to have appropriate regulations. And certainly some oil and gas has gone off to North Dakota. The price of oil stays at $80 a barrel instead of $100. A lot of those jobs are going to come back because it's more expensive to produce in South Dakota than it is in Colorado.
Okay, thank you, Governor. Now we want to give you an opportunity to ask your opponent questions. You each have 30 seconds to ask a question. Your opponent has a minute to answer, and you each have 2 questions. Congressman Beaupre, you have the first question.
Governor, on your official website, there's something called the Colorado Violation Decision-Making Process User's Guide. In fact, I downloaded and printed one. I've got it here. Did you even know that according to your own standards that were adopted in March of 2011, a sex offender could volunteer in child-related locations, that's directly from the language of the document, and not have their parole revoked?
Again, I don't have the document in front of me, and I haven't read it, so I'm not aware of the details of that.
This is approved on your watch, March of 2011.
But I have to see what the details of it are in what context, and what, you know, there's a number of issues around sexual offenders. A 17-year-old has is dating a young woman who's underage, and somebody files a case against that, he becomes a sex offender. Now, I'm not sure that's fair or not fair, but that's what sometimes happens. I don't know if that's what that's referring to or not. Maybe that person is in certain situations allowed. Actually, I know by law they're not, but maybe there's some way in that they are allowed to do that.
Sean, this is why public safety is an important campaign issue.
Okay, I'll take a look at that later. Governor Hickenlooper, your first question.
You know, in Colorado, a handshake still means something. And when we shook hands at the Denver Post debate, we agreed to run positive ads. We didn't say that we were going to try and denounce the other side's ads. We both said, and we looked right each other in the eye, you call it a stunt, but we said we were going to both run positive ads. I've been in business most of my life, and I live by handshakes. Usually, I mean, every time I ever shook hands, then I was giving my word. You said, we will only run positive ads. What did you mean by, we will only run positive ads?
You must have forgotten the context of the question. Joey Bunch from the Denver Post asked you specifically if you thought that Democrat Governors Association ad wasn't a negative ad, and then invited you to speak out against it.
That's when I gave you the challenge.
That's when you stepped across and said, let's just run a positive campaign. But before you finished answering his question, you failed, and he invited you and I invited you to denounce that ad as false, and you wouldn't do it. You broke your own pledge. Governor, I've shook a lot of hands in my life, too. Remember what I did for a living. I sold a lot of cows on a handshake. I made a lot of deals as a banker on a handshake, and I'm still making deals on a handshake. You violated the gimmick that you put forward, and then you let other people do your dirty work. Don't accuse me of doing what you did before you stopped answering Joey's question that night.
All right, Congressman, now to your second question.
Governor, you like to call it picking a fight with Washington to take a position on the Keystone Pipeline, or to try to keep the federal government out of our classrooms, or to stand up to the federal government on behalf of Colorado land and Colorado water and Colorado natural resources, or to oppose Obamacare mandates. Instead of standing up for rights and interests of Coloradans, why are you always so quick and willing to stand alongside Barack Obama in Washington, D.C.?
Well, I think the bottom line is you're misstating the reality of the facts. When we deal with the sage grouse issue, which is of vital importance across this state.
You were 3 years late getting to the table on that.
I began
3 years.
Congressman, I began co-chairing that committee with the Western Governors Association in 2012. So that's not 3 years late.
That's not what they think in Northwest Colorado.
Well, I would beg to differ. It depends on who you're talking to.
I'm sure you would.
It's an election year. Are you going to let me answer?
Please.
When we chair that, I chair that with Matt Mead, who's a Republican governor from Wyoming. And we have looked at all the ways that Colorado ranchers and farmers, through conservation easements, through innovation technology in terms of innovations in fencing and managing their land, are actually improving the habitat for the sage grouse. We now look at this as a way that we are building with Republicans and Democrats, right? Governors from all kinds of Western states, from both parties, a framework where we can push back to the BLM and to the Fish and Wildlife and say, hey, we're doing a better job than the federal government is. And that's one of many examples.
Okay, thank you, Governor. You have the final question.
Congressman, you have spent a good deal of your campaign criticizing me for what you call failed leadership. But when we asked you a couple weeks ago to identify a single bill that you'd authored and seen pass into law during 4 years in Congress, you talked about the funding for the new VA hospital, how you'd helped on that, which was a delegation effort that ultimately fell to your successor to get passed. So I'm not saying you didn't work on other pieces, but I'm going to ask again, what bill did you ever author that actually got passed into law, that you authored?
Governor, you just mischaracterized the truth. And I am offended by that. I served on the Veterans Administration Committee. I represented Colorado veterans and Colorado veterans' request to get through the process, the approval of that hospital that's now under construction. I made sure that over the next 4 years that Colorado kept a place at the table for one of only 3 hospitals that was going to be approved and built. And I made sure, in fact, I think it was my very last vote before I left Congress that language for the original appropriations was in that appropriations bill we got passed to fund what's now coming out of the ground to serve our veterans in Colorado. I am very proud of having done that and brought transportation dollars back to Colorado, and frankly, Governor, something that you're benefiting from right now. The continuation of the payment on fast tracks, that was largely responsible to a staffer of mine and my work on the Transportation Committee to make sure those dollars came to Colorado.
Thank you.
So please don't mischaracterize my record.
All right, joining me again, CPT 12 political analyst Eric Sonderman.
Thanks, Sean. Gentlemen, we now have a series of speed round questions. Let's see how many we can get through. You'll each have 30 seconds to answer, and no rebuttals in this round. Let's start with the top story these days, that of Ebola. If we had an Ebola patient in Colorado, how confident are you that the state health department could safely handle that patient and keep the virus from spreading? Congressman, why don't we let you have first crack at this one?
I am confident, and largely because I visited with Dr. Rich Zane, who is the head of emergency preparedness, the emergency room, emergency services at the University of Colorado Hospital. I have to commend our State Department of Health and the healthcare professionals. I think they've done a commendable job. Early detection, isolation is critically important, and I commend our healthcare professionals, and as much as need be, I'll even give a tip of the hat to the current administration on that one.
Governor?
Well, I certainly agree. Dr. Larry Wolk has done a great job of preparing everyone. I think one of the real issues, at least so far as we've seen Ebola, is why is it that we aren't using technology better? And in terms of making sure that people that might have been exposed, why aren't we using their handheld devices to make sure that we communicate that to them on a daily basis as we understand the situation better? How are we not making sure that we have all manner of social media that are helping us inform people so that there's not the uncertainty and anxiety that really has kind of spread around the whole issue?
Let's keep moving. Given the news today out of Adams County that more than 200 people received duplicate ballots, how confident can Colorado voters be in the integrity of this coming election, Governor?
Well, unlike other foreign countries, at least we catch it. And we take it very, very seriously. The Secretary of State is obviously going to investigate this and make sure that it gets taken care of. I feel very confident. I mean, no system is perfect, but when you look at millions of votes being cast, the amount of voter missteps in terms of how our Secretary of State operates, I think in Colorado, as in almost every state, we run clean, fair elections.
Your view, Congressman?
Well, we hope we do. I think it's very troubling, frankly, Eric, that we hear these stories of duplicate ballots, or as we've also heard this week in media stories, efforts to actually find ballots, dumpster dive, if you will, to find blank ballots and then fraudulate them. I think it's very concerning, and it's one of the issues that I think we're going to have to keep an eye on, be honest about, and objective about, and address in future elections whether or not we need to reform our laws.
Congressman, you're first on this one. What steps would you take specifically to ensure the retirement security of Coloradans?
Retirement security is pretty important to somebody who's 66 years old and has two older brothers. I think we have to be very vigilant on it. And you know, as a former banker, protecting the public's funds, public's money, individuals' money, especially their retirement funds, is crucially important to me. We have plenty of laws in place. What we need to do is make sure that we always have the enforcement and the support of law enforcement to do just that. Promises made are promises that need to be kept, and somebody's retirement is one of those promises that can't be violated.
Governor?
Certainly in terms of state employees with para, there was a lot of concern. The court case that came out last week said that we can adjust the cost of living increase when we have to in those dire situations to make sure it remains solvent. But we have a great many other workers in Colorado that aren't part of para, and we need to do more to make sure that we can guarantee that they have something to retire on. Charles Schwab is building a large campus on the south part of town. I've gotten to know Chuck Schwab and talked to him just a few weeks ago about would he be willing to come and actually hold and kind of keynote a conference where we begin looking at how can we maintain retirement for everybody, sufficient funds.
Thank you. If, as projected, the state budget starts running a Tabor surplus, should that money be returned to taxpayers, or would you ask to use it to restore services cut during the recession? Governor?
You know, I think first it's amazing to look at the fact that we are bumping up against Tabor now. In 4 years, despite many claims by the congressman that the economy really isn't doing as well as other economies, if you told anyone 4 years ago we'd be in this position, they would have been incredulous. I think I have no intention of trying to take an initiative to the voters. There are a lot of different ways that we can return the money to the voters, but we will follow the law. And Tabor is very specific, and I've always supported Tabor. We'll make sure that that money gets back to the voters.
That's a different answer than he gave in a previous debate.
No.
I very much think it's the voters' money, and that the money ought to be returned to the voters. Look, you know better what to do with your own money than the governor does. The reality is you've waited a long time for this day to get some funds back, because during this supposed recovery, average household income has actually declined about $4,000. It'd be nice if government could give you a break instead of the other way around, and on my watch, that's exactly what will happen. The law will be followed, and the money will be returned.
And lastly, you've both been in public life for a long time. If you each had one, we'll call it a do-over, what would it be, Congressman?
The biggest lesson I learned when I was in Congress was that you can't always trust some of the people you're closest to. I trusted leadership when I cast my vote for Medicare Part D that we'd come back and find ways to pay for that. I don't regret getting pharmaceuticals to senior citizens, but I do regret believing leadership when they said we'd come back and find the dollars to pay for it. I learned the lesson of fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. I wouldn't make that same mistake.
And Governor?
I think that when we had that tumultuous legislative session 2 years ago, we went too rapidly. And for a variety of reasons, I think many of them well-intentioned, the legislature pushed one meeting after another, and many people, especially in rural Colorado, didn't feel that their voice was being heard. And I think that more time to listen and hear both sides, it's always beneficial. And certainly it helps keep momentum going when you're trying to deal with a sequence of difficult issues.
Unfortunately, that concludes our speed round of the debate.
And now we are to our final segment. Boy, the time has just flown by, right? Closing statements. Before the debate began, we had a coin toss, and Governor Hickenlooper won. He was given the choice of order for closing statements, and he elected to go last. So, Congressman Beaupre, you have 1 minute for your closing statement.
Sean, Eric, Alan, everybody at Channel 4, and certainly those of you that have tuned in tonight, thank you very much for this opportunity. A good friend of mine told me the other day, you know, a governorship is a terrible thing to waste. And in a very serious way, that's why I'm in this. Governors can make a difference. Governors can make a difference for their state, for their people. I want to provide opportunity to this great state that it's always provided to me. Dreams I never even imagined dreaming have come true for Claudia and I here in Colorado. And it saddens me to see that other states seem to be getting that opportunity now instead of Colorado. That's simply wrong. Look, governors' primary job is less to govern the people and much more to govern government. As I said earlier, I don't want to run your life. I want you to have the freedom to run your own life. I don't want to run your family or your small business, but I want you to have the freedom and the liberty to do that for yourself. That's what will guide me every single day. The opportunity that this great state can provide for you.
Thank you. Governor, you get the final word in the final gubernatorial debate.
Well, again, Sean and Eric and Alan, Channel 4, thank you for having us. Colorado's future is going to be about innovation and collaboration, not about picking pointless fights. 4 years ago, we had $1 billion shortfall in the state budget. We were 40th in job creation. 4 years later, we've come back, and we are now have gone from 40th to 4th. We have a $650 million rainy day fund. We've had 35 consecutive months of job growth. That's the most since 1996. We achieved all this while dealing with unexpected disasters, 13 federally declared disasters. We did it by working together. Now, my opponent seems to enjoy sometimes picking fights, or at least with me, but these fights are high risk. Oil and gas versus local control, equating IUDs with abortion. We have more to do. Right? We can be the healthiest state in America. We can have the most innovative public education system in the country. We can be the #1 state for job creation. Together, isn't the Washington way. Together is the Colorado way. And the Colorado way is always going to work. I would like to thank all of you, but I would also like to ask for everyone, each and every viewer's vote. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Governor. That's all the time we have, gentlemen. Thank you for joining us for this important setting to help our viewers make informed choices in campaign 2014.
If you'd like to check out this debate again or want to make sure other voters see it, we'll be re-airing it tonight on CPT Channel 12 at 8 p.m. and then again on Sunday, November 2nd at 9 p.m.
And tomorrow night here on CBS 4, Alan and I will take a look back at campaign 2014 and our special on the candidates and issues. And our team is working together for complete coverage election night. We'll be live on CPT 12 starting at 7 p.m. election night. We'll have all the race results as well as live coverage from the campaign headquarters to get reaction from the winners and losers.